The next steps in the vaccination program, given that we've now received the vaccines, is a launch that will be taking place at the National Hospital tomorrow. The time scheduled for that launch is 10 a.m. The launch will be conducted by the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. So the plan is to vaccinate the frontline health workers that work in the treatment center of the National Hospital. Those will be the first people, just like we've communicated, that frontline health workers will be the first people to get the vaccine. After that, the plan is to vaccinate Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, and strategic leaders on Saturday. Again, we're hopeful that when Nigerians see leaders like Mr. President and the Vice President take this vaccine, it will increase their confidence around the safety of the vaccines. As you're well aware, even before the vaccines arrived in Nigeria, there was a lot of hesitancy. But the hesitancy is not localized to Nigeria. It is a global phenomenon, and the ways to overcome vaccine hesitancy is similar no matter where you are. We have to provide the right information to those people who have questions. We cannot dismiss their cynicism. We cannot assume that they do not know. It is our responsibility as health workers, as public health workers, not to only offer the vaccine, but do the extra work in terms of providing the resources that are needed to convince people that these vaccines are safe, just like my sister, the DG of NACI, has enumerated all of the processes that went into making sure that these vaccines are validated to be safe and effective. Sharing this information with Nigeria, that is the work that all of us have to do, and that is work that we're trying to do. And we have seen in the last few weeks how from up to 75% of Nigerians indicating that they will not be taking this vaccine, to just about 25% who are saying they will definitely not take this vaccine. We have about 50% that say yes, they will, and 25% that are not so sure. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and we know that we have the resources and the commitment to get this job done. So after we're able to get our strategic leaders to publicly demonstrate that these vaccines are safe, the plan is to now go to the state level to start the launch from the treatment centers of the state's levels, and then also get strategic leaders such as governors to publicly take the vaccines. By the time all of this happens, we will have finished all of the necessary preparations. We have created a dashboard that will track very carefully the status of preparedness of the states. We will not be sending vaccines to the states that have not fulfilled all of the criteria that will ensure that if the vaccines get to the states, that they are going to be safe. So, for example, we have communicated to the states that they have to ramp up their security around their cold stores, because these are very valuable vaccines, and we do not want a situation where the vaccines are taken to the state and criminal elements take advantage to vandalize these cold stores. We are also aware that during the NSARS vandalization, that there were some cold stores that actually suffered. I know that the state governors are trying to fix those, but we have to verify that those are ready to receive our vaccines. We're working with the sub-national level. We're in conversations with the Nigeria Governors Forum to see how all of this will work together so that Nigerians can rapidly get their vaccines. It is very, very critical that we roll out rapidly so that we can cut into any types of mutations that will potentially lead to the development of resistance against our vaccines. So by the time all of this is done, we're hopeful that we will roll out to all of the other frontline health workers that are in the field by the 12th of March. Again, most of the states will probably have 1 or 2 days, couple of days difference, depending on their preparedness to receive the vaccine. It is important that we're successful in the rollout of this vaccine. Now, in terms of our prioritization, which is the last part of my update, we have communicated in the past, and bear me when I repeat that the first phase of our rollout of this vaccination is going to focus on the frontline health workers. But these are the people that are in closest proximity to people that have COVID-19. So they are the ones that we have to give the vaccines to. They are the ones that have sacrificed in the last 1 year, putting their lives and the lives of their families at risk. So they are going to be the first line of people that we will provide these vaccines to. Then we will consider other health workers and then other first responders, our security outfit, and then, for the purpose of demonstrating the safety of these vaccines, the strategic leaders. The second phase will be around identifying those people who are, again, very vulnerable to the COVID-19 virus. The elderly. The elderly people are more likely to have severe disease and die from these vaccines. So we're going to be identifying them and also giving them the vaccine in the second phase. Part of what the e-registration does is to get information about the age of the individual who's filling out the form. It also has information around the presence of underlying disease. So the third group of individuals that we're going to be giving these vaccines to are those that have underlying disease. Again, they are likely to suffer worse if they contract COVID-19. So the electronic database helps us sort of segment all of these populations. Then the last group will be those who do not have any of these conditions or any condition that predisposes them to have worse fate if they were to contract the disease. We do know that we're going to be vaccinating only people that are 18 and above. But clearly, one thing that all of these processes that has brought us here today has shown us is that the Presidential Task Force and everybody who is involved in the COVID-19 response has clearly seen all of the trouble that we have gone through to make sure that we select only vaccines that have received WHO emergency use listing and have been validated by NAFDAC. I know there are so many countries that started vaccinating before Nigeria, but if you are to inquire, you will find that a lot of them did not wait for WHO emergency use listing. Some of them did not wait for some of the stringent regulatory agencies to certify these vaccines before they started using them. That is not what we're going to do in Nigeria. That is not what we have done. We've gone through a rigorous process, and we're pretty comfortable that the vaccines that we're going to be rolling out in the next couple of days are going to be safe and effective against the virus. Now, we can confidently say, with all of the non-pharmaceutical interventions that will continue, we have now taken that first and determined step towards turning the corner when it comes to the...
We get vaccines in Nigeria started April 2020, last year, when we had to understand the disease before we start understanding what is going to kill the virus. And that started with international meetings, WHO, ICMRA, Coalition of Medicine Regulatory Authorities, African Medicine Regulatory Harmonization, and NAFDAC was bent on making sure that we were prepared. There's a lot that goes into approval of vaccines, whether for emergency use or for licensure. In this case, it's emergency use. So based on the trainings that we got, and of course our own routine regulatory activities, we developed guidance. This is one of the guidances that we have developed since the beginning of the pandemic. Whether it's guidance to do face masking, or to regulate face mask or diagnostics, this is one of the guidances that we had, the preparedness for vaccines. How do we approve vaccines? Vaccine, of course, is a drug, and usually, if it is not a pandemic situation, the manufacturer brings the formulation or the package to us. But in case of COVID-19 vaccines, there are three mechanisms that we use to approve a vaccine. We use the emergency use authorization mechanism, which is what we are using now. And even that, we can do it using what is called reliance, meaning that regulatory agencies that are more matured than NAFDAC, for example, will have approved the vaccine, like UK, FDA, US FDA. And the approval of a vaccine is a very, very stringent academic exercise. You have to know your science before you sit down and contribute towards approving or assessing the dossier or the package. Because it involves physics, chemistry, mathematics, of course English, biotechnology, informatics. All these professionals or disciplines are brought together to start looking at the application package. Let me just give an example of COVID vaccine. It is the AstraZeneca vaccine. It is a viral vector-based vaccine, but it has other things inside it. Will the other things that are inside it, will it affect the protein itself or the biological? These are the things that we have to put into perspective. So what we then did for our own COVID vaccine processing is to rely on what America or UK did. We went, as soon as they finished the assessment, we went on their website and downloaded the assessment report before we got our own application package, which is called the dossier, from the manufacturer. We went through it again. There are 4 or 5 directorates that came together in NAFDAC to ensure that whatever they reported or assessed, we understand, but peculiarities. What are the things that may be peculiar to our own client, to sub-Saharan Africa? Because most of the phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials that were done were not done in sub-Saharan Africa. And the data could be the same when we start looking at our own monitoring or safety monitoring, but they may not. So we we noted all this. So when we now got our dossier, the first one, of course, is the AstraZeneca. Our vaccine committee in NAFDAC spent hours looking at the dossier relative to what we have already learned about that particular dossier. And the first thing is quality. What is the quality of this vaccine? The processing, the validation of that processing. There are many variables that go into formulation or into processing. Are the variables adding up in terms of the product? The next thing is the safety. What are the safety issues that were observed during phases 1, 2, and 3? Then efficacy. For example, Pfizer-BioNTech is about 95% efficacious. Moderna about the same. Sputnik about 91%. AstraZeneca about 70%. So we look at all this and then depend on or rely on what others did. That was the basis for approving AstraZeneca. We have other vaccines, other doses that we are looking at right now. Pfizer-BioNTech, Sputnik. And we are doing the same justice to the different doses. When we approved, we started talking with Serum Institute of India to ensure that all the things that we needed once the vaccines get here, we have. We are going to do we are doing track and trace, because falsified vaccines are already in the global market. Falsified COVID vaccines. So what we did, and we have been training for this for about 2.5 years in NAFDAC. Traceability is a GS1, is a global standard driven track and trace to make sure that there is no infiltration of substandard vaccines in the supply chain. When the AstraZeneca vaccine arrived 2 days ago, our port inspection had to check it in. This is our routine, and we use a software called PIDCAMS that was developed by one of our staff. But it is not just the port inspection checking in. Then we have to scan each of the boxes. But before we did the scanning, we got we requested for what is called master data from Serum Institute, so that we know that this batch 1 or batch 2, batch 3, if it goes to local government 1, 2, 3, we can trace from the airports, the cold store of MPHCDA, we can trace that vaccine to the patient. So we are using track and trace, and then NAFDAC is the Center for Pharmacovigilance in Nigeria. What is pharmacovigilance? It's safety monitoring of any medicine we take. But we were also preparing for this time, because before we used to use the yellow form to fill side effects, adverse reactions, but now we have what is called Med Safety App. It is an app that more than 50 million people can download free. If you go to Google Store or App Store, you can download it. Med Safety App. Once you download it, it will tell you, it will take you through the steps. So it is for healthcare workers and educated consumers. So if you get the vaccine next week, for example, you have the Med Safety App. You will enter your name, and of course, first of all, it is customized for Nigeria. There are many countries that use it. Nigeria is one of them. You click Nigeria, and it will take you through how to register. So if you have fever or soreness in your arm or whatever, you put it down there. And it will automatically be transferred to us, NAFDAC, and then we will gather that information. It will go to Uppsala, Sweden. Why is this so important? It is important because, first, this has not been done, this COVID vaccine has not been used in a large population of sub-Saharan Africans. Pfizer has had 10% of African Americans in their phase 3 clinical trials. So it is important to see the uniqueness of our own response to the vaccine. So we're going to be using the Med Safety App. We're going to be doing it. We're going to be presenting it on NAFDAC and Your Health. We are putting it on different platforms. Many healthcare workers are being trained as we speak. So that is part of what we're going to be doing. Track and trace and pharmacovigilance. And with pharmacovigilance, it is the three of us, NCDC, Primary Health, and NAFDAC. It is a collaborative thing. And my brother here, my brother Dr. Chikwe, is going to talk about the variants. We have to do abridged clinical trials to know that, okay, the variants from UK they don't have the impact or efficacy on AstraZeneca. We have to test it. We have to check it. So that is part of the abridged studies that we're going to be doing together. Thank you very much.
I will build more laboratories to test and diagnose. We started out with 2 laboratories. Now we have over 80 laboratories in the country. We started out with 0 reagents, when at that time our only option was to have taken samples to Johannesburg to test. Now we are able to do all our testings here in country. In fact, in every state you can now test. So there's been a lot of improvement in that area. The second strategy is to improve upon the treatment options, which we continue to do. Government is producing a 10-bed, is going to pay for 10-bed ICU in every state and build isolation center in every state to provide the capacity. Right now we have good bed capacity, about 31% at the moment occupancy, so that some space is available. The purpose is to observe those who are isolated, keep them away, and if there are any complications, to pick up the complications immediately and provide treatment so as to reduce the fatality rate. More studies are being done on therapeutics. We are observing what's happening in the international scene. Are there new discoveries? Are there new drugs? We are waiting to see what is new, and we apply them here. Then we are also sustaining routine treatment. Now, too much focus on COVID-19 or too much fear of COVID-19 can lead to a slackening of routine treatment of all hospital cases. That is a thing that has been observed in many countries. There is a reduction in antenatal care. There can be reduction in routine immunization. So, and even reduced clinic visits. We want to counter all of that to make sure that we maintain routine services and that even as we are vaccinating now against COVID-19, normal routine vaccinations will go on. Normal clinic will go on. Normal emergencies will go on. So there should be no reduction in routine care because we do not want to be losing persons or patients to other causes while running away from COVID-19 deaths. So that is very important strategy for the Ministry of Health. The fourth thing is to develop our emergency medical service to be able to respond to persons in distress. We do not have that much of a system in this country for responding to people who have a medical distress. If you are sick in your home, you have asthma, you have a heart attack, you have anything at all, or if you had an accident, either a workplace, or you hear of a tanker that is exploding and spilling fuel and there are burns, we do not really have a system that responds to that. So we need to create that system, which we are working on, to provide emergency service to citizens when they need it and where they need it. And that includes responding also to COVID-19 cases. There were stories of persons who are suffering acute symptoms of COVID-19, breathlessness, trying to drive themselves to the hospital and collapsing on the way because they couldn't get there. We do not want a system like that. We want to be able to get a phone call and an ambulance comes to pick up the person or the patient. So we are developing that emergency medical service. Finally, and that is the big thing we are about today, the deployment of vaccines. Now, vaccination started around December in the UK and the US, and is a much awaited, let us say, silver bullet that should take care of COVID-19. But I must give a warning right away that it does not mean the end of all other measures. All the measures I've spoken about now will continue. They will have to continue. We are not going back on the non-pharmaceutical interventions or the public health measures. They must continue so that we continue to protect ourselves throughout the period. As you can see in Europe and America, they are still continuing all these measures. Even despite the inoculation going on, they are still keeping lockdowns in some countries. So we must not relent, we must not get slack. And the vaccination is a very important thing. The history of it should not put anyone in doubt because it was developed in about a year. The shortest it had taken to develop any vaccines before was the vaccine against mumps, which took 4 years. This has taken a year. It is because it is a child of necessity. But all those who have developed vaccines have tried to do a very thorough job to produce safe and effective vaccines. So we can rely and depend on the vaccines that have been provided for use. Now, the strategy for deploying this vaccine will be dwelt on by MPHCDA very soon. But essentially, there are various types of vaccines. There's the mRNA, which Pfizer and Moderna are using, and maybe one or two others. And then there's the viral vector vaccine, which is used by AstraZeneca and also Sputnik. And then the various attempts by different countries, including Nigeria, to produce vaccines. I'll come back to that later on. But what are sources of vaccines? We have two main sources and a third probable one. The first is COVAX facility. For those who do not know, COVAX is a facility set up by the World Health Organization, supported by the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and the Gavi, Global Initiative for Vaccines and Immunization. So they are the ones who came together to get donations from various sources. to make up to $6 billion, probably more than that by now, to ensure that there is equitable distribution of these vaccines. 92 countries are covered, low and lower medium income countries, including Nigeria, who will get these vaccines to cover 20% of their population. And this 20% should include healthcare workers, the elderly, and those who are at risk. The second source is the AVAT, African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, led by the African Union. The chair is the president of South Africa, who have pulled together resources guaranteed by AstraZeneca to get enough vaccines to cover Africa in a whole of continent approach, so that no country on the continent will be left behind and not be able to vaccinate its citizens. And they give this loan that you can pay back within 5 to 7 years. Nigeria has already opened her account with AstraZeneca, and we have already nominated someone who is taking part in the negotiations for the strategy of going forward and making payments. We are also in bilateral discussions. The government of India has offered us 100,000 units of their vaccine made from the Serum Institute of India. And the Russians have offered us also 100,000 vaccines. We do not know whether we are paying for it or whether it is free. We haven't been told yet. But we are also receiving support from MTN that has offered us up to over 1 million doses. And then the support of, as far as financing is concerned, we are hoping to get support from the UN agencies who have created a single basket fund. We are working on a supplementary budget of the federal government. We have been talking with CACOVID, that's a coalition against COVID-19 of the private sector in Nigeria, who have been very generous. They have supported us all along the way. And also looking at using residual funds, unspent funds from various World Bank loans that Nigeria has been using in the health sector. Now, the strategy for the rollout will be discussed by MPCDA very soon. Now, let me say here that government has been extremely generous and responsive in all of this. Right from the beginning, they provided all the resources that were required. Right from the first day, they asked, how much do you want? And NCDC was given a grant. Port Health Services was given a grant. And since then, they have provided everything. As I've said just now, government has provided one ICU bed, one ICU unit, one isolation unit, oxygen plants, and any other thing that other countries, that were required in the health sector have been provided per state. So we are very well supplied, and we have had no distress from that area. Now, we have also received help from the European Union, from China, from Jack Ma Foundation, from USAID, from India, from the West African Health Organization with which we are working, and they have already mentioned the African CDC, who have helped us. So now I would like to invite for a deeper dive into the processes for utilizing vaccines.
I think altogether you will agree that with the leadership of Mr. President, Nigeria has actually mounted a very robust response to this outbreak. And you know, when things go wrong in our country, we often blame government. And when they go right, we thank God. But I think in this case, God may have walked a little bit through the leadership of our country to establish the mechanisms that have directed the robust response we've had so far. The Honorable Minister and my colleagues have already eloquently given a breakdown of all the aspects. So I'll just focus on two things. For us at NCDC, our response continues as much as vaccines provide some light, very important light, But the response has to continue. We have to continue our surveillance. We have to continue our testing. We have to continue protecting our healthcare workers with the personal protective equipment that we're doing. We have to sustain the critical investments that we've put into our health security infrastructure for the first time in decades. We cannot let this go because we have to continue this work. So that's the work we will have to continue doing, supporting our colleagues at MPHCDA who will now be leading the response, but also continuing to drive risk communication, educating Nigerians on the benefits that vaccines will provide to them, but what they need to continue doing throughout this response. And of course, we've all heard about the risks of emerging variants of the virus. As viruses are transmitted from one person to the other, there's a risk of new variants emerging. But the fact that there's a new variant in itself is not a problem. The challenge is when that variant has an impact on the efficacy of vaccines, i.e. how well vaccines offer the protection that has been predicted. And that's what we have to now study very carefully in our context, and we're making plans to do so as we roll out this service. There will be many new variants. I won't bore you with all the details, but the key thing is to understand that the fact that Brazil was able to identify that there was a variant that led to a reduced effectiveness of the vaccine wasn't by chance. It's because they looked. They looked by having the studies in place and executed in order to find that impact. And that's exactly what we're planning to do over the next few weeks here. I'll end by appealing to Nigerians. It's been a tough year for all of us as we have given up so much of what makes us who we are. We have limited our celebrations, limited our opportunities to eat together, to dance together, to pray together, to be the people that we are. But we need to hold on for a little while longer so that we can consolidate the gains that we've had over the last year and make sure that we come out of this in a good place. The Honorable Minister has highlighted the difficult challenges many countries that are not too dissimilar from us, in Brazil, for instance, are going through. So at the beginning of this outbreak last year, you remember all the allusions to the weather, the heat, the tropics. They're not dissimilar from Brazil. They're going through a very difficult period at the moment. So it might be that there's an alternative explanation. It might be that we have actually delivered a fairly strong response in Nigeria. And so I'll end by saying that this is actually a moment for health security. In 2004-05, after the SARS outbreak, China started the establishment of the China CDC. It is now an institution of 5,000 people working every day very hard to protect those people. After the 2014-15 Ebola outbreak here in West Africa, we saw the establishment of the Africa CDC. And if there's any highlight of the response on the continent, it's been the collaborative effort of all African countries. The Honorable Minister just mentioned the efforts being led on by ACDC in enabling access to Africans for vaccines. Unlike many other continents, all the other continents, Africa has actually worked together. You haven't heard about nationalism in Africa as a theme. That's because of the robust response by the Africa CDC. This is a moment for Nigeria. And with the efforts of Mr. President, the Presidential Task Force, and of course the commitment of the Honorable Minister, we will build